moving forward. Now, you'll notice that the camp of Israel is governed by God through this cloud or fire. Cloud by day, fire by night. Isn't that neat? The imagery of a cloud shading you from the hot sun during the day, and the fire warming you, lighting your path in the cold or the dark night. That is what our covenants and what our connection with Christ should do. And it should guide us where we should go, because when it's time to move, that cloud or that fire would lift, and they would know it's time to take down the tabernacle. We're on the move again. And it would move, and they would follow it, and then whenever it's set down, that's where they would set up the tabernacle. So I love these symbolic imageries that come to mind as you picture this actual camp of Israel, and figuring out how that pillar of fire and that cloud of smoke is a part of our life today. If we're looking up, we're seeking to hear Him and seeking to follow His direction and go where He wants us to go, realizing that there are times when He gives us full agency, and we have to figure out what we're going to do with what we have in our wilderness wanderings. And as we get ready now to go into chapter 11, I think it's important to point out that for some people, on some occasions or during some periods of their life, they can't see the fire. They can't see the smoke. They can't hear the voice very clearly speaking to them for a variety of reasons. And it's not always because of bad things you've done. Sometimes it's because of external circumstances. A dear friend and colleague, Lincoln Blumel, shared a powerful analogy with me recently. He said that when you're going through the wilderness and you're trying to hold on to the iron rod on that covenant path or that straight and narrow path, he said there are two kinds of faith. And one of them is the kind of faith where you can see far off in the distance the goal. You can see the tree of life. It's there, and you know there are ravines and twists and turns and mountains in between and valleys in between, but you can kind of see the goal, and you press forward with faith on the covenant path. And then he said, but there are other times when you find yourself in a dark mist, in a situation of life where you can't see anything. You have no idea what's even one step in front of you, let alone where the end goal is. And you have to move forward on absolute sheer faith and trust in God alone. And sometimes that stretches out longer than just a day or two or a week. Sometimes that can stretch out for months or years or decades. I love this analogy here of this wilderness wandering, because it's motivating to me to say it doesn't matter whether I can see the end goal very clearly or whether I'm basking in the light of revelation and hearing His voice very clearly at a certain time, or whether I can't hear anything or see anything. The answer is still press forward with faith, trusting that the Lord will bring us through this wilderness experience. In fact, we've talked about this before, but the root word for wilderness, inside of the word wilderness, is wild. It's wild. It's not tame. It means there are trials, and we're going to now walk with the children of Israel through trial after temptation, after difficulty, after struggle, after wrestle, again and again and again. It's not tame. They can't rely on their own capacity, on their own learning, on their own power, or their own strength of arm to make things work out. And this is going to stretch out for 40 years for this people.
And we've talked before that it could have been exactly to the day 40 years, but 40 also is a symbol in the Bible of a long time. So we all suffer at times, and we could probably count the days when we suffer or we wander in our own wildernesses. And maybe it is 40 days, but whenever we're suffering, anybody I've ever talked to and in my own suffering, it always feels like a long time. So there's deep value here in the Numbers story where we can learn from these people wandering for a long time. And we see they're very human. We see a lot of complaining, a lot of backbiting and murmuring, and God working again and again with them to say, look, I know this is hard. There's a reason I brought you out to the wilds. I want you to learn to fully trust me, which means he has to give them practice. He does a lot of forgiving, but in some cases he's like, well, okay, here's some blessings you're not going to get access to because you have been so persistently untrustworthy or untrusting. But all of us can learn to trust God, that he's got this, that even though it might feel like we're a long time in the wilderness, he understands the whole path. He knows where we are, and he will always be with us, even if we don't necessarily feel it at that moment.
Which, by the way, for some of you who, for yourself or family members, happen to be going through a very dark and dreary wilderness right now at this phase of your life, here's the question to consider. If you had a button in front of you on a table that if you push that button, it would take away all of the struggle, all of the darkness, all of the uncertainty, all of your questions would be answered, all of the direction would be clear, all of the strength that you need would be given, everything would be cured, everybody would have 100% absolute faith. If you could push that button, would you? And many would say, yes, show me the button, where is it? But in reality, if you cast your mind backward in time to other wilderness wanderings that you've experienced in the past, what difference would it have made if partway into that, the struggle had been removed? It had been solved. Everything had been taken away. Would you have become who you are today? And again, I think one of the messages for the book of Numbers for us today is that life isn't about ease and comfort and pleasure and 100% success and nobody ever struggling, nobody ever suffering, nobody ever losing anything or dying. I think the real beauty of these wilderness passages of Scripture are the opportunities that they give us to acknowledge that God is with us in our afflictions, not just standing at the end of the road if we can just figure out how to get through the afflictions. And even though we may not feel him in those darkest parts of our struggles, his assurance is he is always there. He will never forsake us.